Asia with research spanning politics, development, environment, law, and human-animal relations. Educated at University of Delhi for her BA and MA, University of Cambridge for her MPhil and PhD. She previously held the Level 2 and British Academy Fellowship at Cambridge. Her award-winning books, Paper Tiger and Crooked Cats, explore the Indian state and climate crisis through ethnographic inquiry. So very excited to hear about this.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. A quick question. How many of you here are social scientists? Because I realize I'm the only social scientist on the panel. Okay, kind of, yeah. And how many of you would like to stay in academia after this? Or you think at this point you might? Okay. So perhaps what I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly just talk about my sort of career path here, and then I'll talk a bit about particularly how I came to Oxford and like just the sort of the questions of precarity and what it means to what academic diversity might mean in this particular context that we're in right now. So a bit of background, Nitya has already talked a bit about it, but let me just say that I came to the UK exactly 20 years back in 2005 to start my master's. I had done my undergraduate and another master's in Delhi University in India, which is where I'm from. I came here on the Gates, I went to Cambridge rather on the Gates Scholarship, Gates Cambridge Scholarship for the PhD, which I finished in 2010. I'm a social anthropologist, by which I mean that I'm a social scientist who believes in doing a lot of primary research, or rather fieldwork-based research, where you go and spend long periods of time in a particular place, and then you build knowledge of that place, and through that you make broader claims. So, for instance, in my first book, which was my PhD work, I was very interested in understanding how the welfare state in India works. Why does it not, why is the Indian developmental state not able to be as effective as you think it might be? And my answer to that was through ethnographic research, which I explored in that book, which was from the PhD. Maybe I talk just a bit about my PhD experience and then like how many of you are doing PhDs here? Are you all PhD scholars? Okay. So then we talk a bit about the PhD and what it was like at Cambridge when I was there. And perhaps the question of academic diversity. So you would think that a discipline like social anthropology would be a diverse discipline because most of the people who sort of work in it, faculty, students, etc., are working in this sort of global setup that they work in different parts of the world, etc. They're interested in different parts of the world. They're interested in diversity. They're interested in being international, etc. But when I came to Cambridge back in 2005, I actually found it a very colonial discipline. I still think it is a colonial discipline. And partly that's because it was founded during the colonial period by colonial white men who sort of thought that there's a certain way in which you represent the world, etc., etc. There is this whole push within the social sciences and humanities to decolonize what this means, and I had my own particular take on it, which I then made into an academic, which became not just questions of diversity in terms of having different kinds of people, like all of us in this room, within the academy. But also for me, it has become, from the time of my PhD till now, a sort of an intellectual, epistemological question of how we construct knowledge, what we think of as knowledge, how do we write, who do we cite, where do we construct, where do we think from, how do we center different parts of the world, how do we try to think outside Euro-America and this Euro-American prism through which a lot of knowledge is constructed. At the same time, it's also, again, a bit like Sophia earlier, I've been very interested in thinking about what diversity means amongst our student body, but also faculty and postdocs in Oxford. I'll talk a bit about that. But going back to the PhD, I did struggle a bit, I think slightly in a way, as you were saying, but like, I think more because I was so struck by how colonial that it felt to me. So on the one hand, I loved being in Cambridge and I had a very supportive supervisor, which was great. And I had a really good cohort of friends, many of them actually from the Gates Scholarship, whom I'm still very, very close friends with and collaborate on things, etc., even today, 20 years later. But I did also struggle with the discipline. I also struggled with some of the assumptions within it. I struggled with the way in which you're supposed to comport yourself and the way you're supposed to be as a particular kind of person in Cambridge and within anthropology. So I finished in 2010, and then I had a series of temporary lectureships because I think the other thing which, again, everyone has talked about already so far, is that the academy, the university now is a very different space from, well, not now, this is 15 years back, but even then, because this is right after the financial crisis of 2008. And you could see the ways in which the university as a site was being attacked, where there were funding was being cut, jobs were being cut, opportunities which seemed like kind of matter of fact for people even like 5 years ahead of me did not seem to exist for me by the time we finished. Um, and it was a really difficult period of being precarious for quite a long time. So I had several temporary lectureships, some at Cambridge. I went up to Edinburgh for a year. Then I got a postdoc in the Leverhulme postdoc at Cambridge, and I came back for that. And I also was lucky enough to get the British Academy. So I got 2 fellowships, which allowed me to do more fieldwork, to write my first book, and then do the fieldwork for the second book, and do sort of research around that. And then I got the lectureship, the associate professorship in Oxford in 2017. So I've been here, this is my 8th year now. And then while I was here, I could publish my second book. And 3 years back, I was promoted to full professor. I think the thing I'd want to sort of say over here are a couple of things. There's a lot of overlap with what has already been said, but let me just say a couple of things, especially on the theme of diversity and what that means. I also want to talk a bit about diversity because it's really under attack right now, from the US president to university policies in Europe to political decisions which are being made in South Asia, etc. There is a way in which there was this phase where we actually took EDI or diversity very seriously. It became part of institutions and our lives. And there was action that was beginning to be taken on it, but a lot of it is receiving a lot of pushback in this moment, as all of you know. And I want to just say what I think diversity is and why I think it's still important. So as I said, for me, one thing about diversity and academic diversity that is really important is to sort of not take particular disciplines or forms of thought or pedagogic traditions, even if they're in Cambridge or Oxford or wherever, and we're taught by people we deeply respect and programs we deeply respect or we think very highly of, not to necessarily feel that you have to follow exactly that, to feel that you should be able to challenge some of these ways in which you are expected to conduct yourself, the ways in which you're expected to conduct knowledge. It could be by rethinking what the PhD is. It could be by getting in different traditions of thought into it, or you're kind of training from other parts of the world into it. And I think that's really important, and that's a very important part of diversity. The other thing about diversity, of course, it is about having different kind of people. So giving opportunities to people who traditionally would not be in the spaces that we're standing in or in the places that we work in, and really thinking very carefully about what that means. And also, once people are in those spaces, not to assume that they automatically belong, but actually try to create sort of environments where everyone feels sort of safe and secure and feels like they can thrive within it. So I feel now that my job as someone who has a job in Oxford is to try to create that kind of space for students and to have different kinds of students, perhaps not your typical Oxford student sitting over there. And when they're there, not to just assume that they'll be fine, but to actually do the work of trying to make them feel welcome and comfortable and at home within it, because this is not easy for any of us. These are incredibly, of course, Oxford and Cambridge are beautiful and brilliant and all of that, but they can also feel really intense and overwhelming. And I think we all have to do a lot of work to feel like we actually do belong and we can belong within it and thrive within it. I think I'll just do one final thing because I know we're running out of time, and we can move on to the Q&A. I think the other thing to really think about for those of you who want to stay in the academy, or if you don't want to stay in the academy, but I think if you want to stay in the academy, is that, and this is something that both the previous speakers have already said in a way, is that I think what we thought of as the traditional career within the academy or within universities is really changing. And it's changing in ways that I don't think we could really predict. But I think what does remain very important is that you use this time and this incredible opportunity that you have right now with your scholarships or being in these places to really do the best work you can and to really think quite carefully about actually the realities of life within the university and what comes after. I think what the previous speaker said was she made a really important point about how you do need to think about what's coming beyond, use this time. But I also think what the speaker before her said was a really important point, which was that there is no one path that people have necessarily followed within the academy if you want to stay on as an academic. I myself had many doubts about whether this is something I want to do, I wasn't sure whether I would be able to stay in it. I had visa issues, I had money issues, I had like all these pressures to publish, and all this, the sense of like, do I really belong? Imposter syndrome, is this worth it? I still have that. Like, I still wonder whether this is worth it, whether it's worth all of it, even though I'm ostensibly here. So I think in a way that I think I think the point I'm trying to say is that this is an uncertain world, and I think that what we thought of as traditional ways of living your life, or particular pathways, or the ways in which one quote unquote progresses, is not necessarily true for anyone, including all of you who are in some ways extremely, extremely privileged to be in Oxford and Cambridge on these extremely prestigious scholarships, which already gives you a leg up, which already gets you, not just the PhD, but it gets you a particular form. I can say from my own personal experience, it was very, very helpful to have the Gates. It was made a huge difference that I did my PhD at Cambridge. It really helped me in the job market. It helped me with my field work. It's helped me with particular forms of recognition. It just helps you in ways which perhaps are unfair, but it does. But even with all that privilege, it's still not necessarily a world that is very certain. And I think it's important to not to get too anxious or too worried about it, but it's also important to be aware of that and to think of, what comes after, even while you're doing your PhD. And I think I'll just end.
Thanks so much, Dr. Mathur. Now if I could invite Rian, Dr. Sonia, and Nayanika, we can have a panel discussion here. Just housekeeping, because we are at 16:43.